spent all that yelling I did at Mary this week. When I looked at the scripture for today, it struck me first that there were 3 lessons. And the more I thought about it, the more I reflected on it, I thought there are really 3 lessons on greatness here. The first lesson doesn't sound like a lesson on greatness. The Son of Humanity is to be betrayed into human hands. They will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. I'm sure when the disciples heard that, they weren't thinking, wow, this is great. But I think as we ponder it more deeply, because of the way that sentence ends, we can say, this is great. We know that incarnation meant for Jesus, and it means for us on our journeys, that there will be suffering, that there will be death. And because of Jesus, we know there will be resurrection. And that is our first lesson on greatness. The second lesson is not quite so, I don't know, positive, I guess. And it's about how the gang is reacting to what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And Jesus says to them, what were you arguing about on the way here? We don't get away with that, you know. God knows what we do. But they were silent. Oh, we know that, don't we? For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. What we know about the disciples is they sometimes get things wrong. What we know about this particular verse is that Jesus is not impressed by what they did. And we can get caught up in that worldly notion of greatness. We usually term it success. And it's all those things that so many people in our world judge as greatness. Power, fame, wealth, and all the things we do to influence others so that they see things our way and then things go our way. But that's not what greatness means to Jesus. Jesus says to them, whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all. There are many people who day after day, week after week, year after year, serve this faith family. And to them and for them, I am grateful. There are people that get what it is that Jesus is saying about greatness here. That it's not measured by wealth and fame and influence. It's measured by service and love and sharing. David Luce says, what kind of world would we live in where people were regularly trying to outdo each other in their deeds of kindness and service? I don't know that we need to outdo each other. That strikes me as rather competitive and not necessarily what Jesus was about. But just to do the best we can in terms of kindness and service all the days that we're here. The third lesson on greatness comes near the end of the passage, where he takes a small child and putting the child among them and taking the child in his arms, he says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me and the one who sent me." In the context of the 21st century, it's different when we read this than how people in the first century might have heard it. Later in that century, in Colossians, Paul actually writes about families, and he calls it instructions for Christian households. Doesn't work so well for us today, but it meant something really, really different then. Probably the most famous line that we love to quote and berate Paul and beat him up about is the one that's about wives be submissive. But the two lines that follow that, husbands love your wives, easy for me to read. And then the one about fathers do not embitter your children, those are radical. Those are radical in the first century. And I'm not sure how to interpret Paul's idea of wives being submissive, except he was probably trying to be helpful and protective. Because the situation in the first century was that the husbands and fathers literally owned the wives and children. And it was not uncommon that if a child was disobedient, not only could the father have the child punished, the father could have the child killed. But before these lines that we hear so often or have heard, are these lines that Paul writes. As God's chosen people, holy and loved, dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And I guess I want to make this aside about patience. Last week, I mentioned that I sometimes got impatient when coffee cups were left in the sink instead of being put in the dishwasher. Yesterday, the coffee cup was put in the dishwasher. Unfortunately, it was my coffee cup, and I had not finished drinking my coffee. So I continued to learn about patience. Bear with each other. Forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone else. Forgive as God forgives you. And over all these virtues, put on love. That's what the third lesson of greatness is about. And it's about our taking care of our children, and it's about loving them and loving one another. Yesterday, Debbie LaKenta and I had a conversation, and I asked her if she would share it today as part of the sermon. So I invite Debbie up to share it now. Okay. I'll just sing until you get back.
Turn the mic off.
Probably.
yesterday when Kathy and I were talking, I think I shared something. We were talking about how we do different things in our community and how we make changes. And I was telling her, you know, when we drive down the street by our house, there's always people with little signs, now that Tori can read, please help. You know, what do we need? What do they need help with? I said, well, they may want money, or they're looking for homes, or so forth, you know. And it's kind of the same folks that we see all the time, you know. So we kind of get to know these folks that live in our neighborhood, right? So Tori says to me, Mommy, let's make a sign. I'm like, okay. And like, all right. And then
Please help.
yeah, please help. So she says, let's make a sign. And what did the sign say?
I love you.
And where did we go with the sign? We went on the corner of Hillsborough and Rome by our house, and we sat on the bus stop, and we just put the sign that says, I love you. And as cars went by, they were beeping, and we were waving, and, you know, we were just very happy. And then we crossed over the street on the other side of Hillsborough and Rome, and we saw our friend that we see all the time, and Tori said, can we collect money for him? And I said, no, we don't need to collect any money for him. So she says, I would like to give him money. And I said, okay, well, where's your little purse? Because she'll have one in the car. So what did you do? Did you give him something?
Yes.
What did you give him?
$1.
$1. And what else did you give him?
The sign.
And what did the sign say? The sign said, I love you. And I swear, that man's face lit up. And he hung it on the fence where he sits. And so we drive by, and we could see the sign that says, I love you. So I wanted to share what our children are doing in our community. You know, so she understands that people need help, and she wanted to make a difference. The other thing that we do once a month, the Meals on Wheels of Tampa is literally down the street from us. So we walk there once a month, and we help fill bags of food with vegetables and fruit, and then we hand it to the people that are delivering it to the seniors. And she understands that not all people have food, and that we need to help. So I just wanted to share those two things that we're doing.
What most of us understand when Jesus tells the disciples about this child that he brings and holds in his arms and says, as long as you take care of one of these, you've taken care of me. And he chooses a child, we think, because children are among our most vulnerable. So anybody in our society who is a child, or who's still in that state, however old they are, of being vulnerable like children. Now those whom Jesus is asking us especially to care for. And that is the third lesson in greatness, that we care for our children. And I guess it doesn't hurt to be reminded of what Reverend Tracy Blackman challenges us with when she asks, how are the children? So may we remember these three lessons of greatness. That no matter what the journey, there is resurrection. That true greatness lies not in worldly success, but in loving and serving. And that it is our children who teach us how to be better parents and better people.